Will the secretary please take the roll?
Yes. Okay. Trustee Berg Martinez.
Here.
Trustee Button.
Here.
Trustee Fairfax.
She is absent.
Trustee Rogers.
She is absent.
Trustee Wilkinson.
Here.
And do I see Mary? Trustee Yamamoto is here. President Bloom.
Yes, here. So we do have a quorum. Approval of the May regular meeting minutes. Any discussion or anything we feel needs to be amended? If not, I will entertain a motion for approval of last month's minutes.
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? All right, meeting minutes have been approved. Public comment. As a note, public comment, we as a board do not necessarily respond to public comment if it is not something that is already part of the agenda. But we do want the public to be a part of public comment. But that's just so that folks know and understand that we may not directly address anything that they present to us during public comment. I did not receive any submissions. Did we receive any submissions?
We did.
Okay. And we will move on to trustee comments and calendar. The two items on the calendar, number one is the Friends Library book sale. If you did not see the boxes of books walking around, I'm already getting really excited. So July 11th through July 13th, and they are already starting to accept donations. The other item here is the July regular board meeting, which is July 22nd. And then for trustee comments, Megan, would you mind reading, Ellsworth was awesome and made copies, but would you mind reading the statement?
Sure.
That you and Suzanne put together?
Thank you. Thank you so much for making that.
No, that was all Ellsworth. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the trustees of Oak Park Public Library ask our community to take action in support of libraries. President Trump's budget proposal submitted on May 30th, 2025 calls for eliminating the funding of the Institute of Museum and Library Services starting in 2026. Additionally, Congress must reauthorize IMLS, the Museum and Library Services Act, by September 30th, 2025, or the agency will cease operations entirely. Without both authorization and funding, IMLS cannot continue supporting libraries, museums across the country. This threatens resource sharing and innovations for everyone. Even though Oak Park Public Library is funded over 90% by local property taxes, Oak Park Public Library depends on IMLS-supported systems like Rails, reaching across the Illinois library systems, and SWAN, system-wide automated network, which provide our community with access to materials from other libraries and offer crucial training for library leadership. Losing IMLS would also eliminate future grant opportunities for programs that directly benefit Oak Park Library and our community. The next critical step in continuing IMLS funding is ensuring the Appropriations Committee includes library funding in their budget. The Oak Park Library Board of Trustees strongly encourages you to reach out to our representatives, including Senator Durbin, who sits on the Senate Appropriations Committee, and emphasize that IMLS reauthorization and funding are vital to our community. Please use this link from the American Library Associations to send a message to our lawmakers to fund libraries. There's a link that says #FundLibraries. And I did use the link. You can just, it's just a template you can fill out, and it goes directly to Senator Durbin.
Okay, perfect. I don't think we have to vote on this, but I would like to make sure that all of us feel comfortable that this would be speaking for us as a board. And that we would then coordinate with Jody and the library team for this to go up on the board page. And then rely on Jody to publish this or publicize this however she sees fit to make sure that it gets visibility, and then from our perspective that we take it from there and push it out ourselves in our own social spaces. The other question I wanted to ask the sitting board is, do we feel comfortable asking former trustees or other elected officials if they would also like to sign their names to this? I know that's something that as a board we've done previously. to lend a little bit of weight and also kind of borrow some of their social networks as well. Do we feel comfortable?
Yes.
Sounds good.
Okay. Then, Megan, do you want to run with this since you met with Jody previously?
What would you like me to do?
Coordinate with her, get her the official copy. It would go up on our board page that is on the library website.
Okay,
And then once it has been pushed out via library social, based on whatever guidelines Jody has, I know she has some
Okay.
guidelines on how those things go out, letting the rest of us know so that we can push it out through Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever else.
okay, so get it to Jody, get it processed in the correct format, get her to put it on the page, and then push it out to you in the correct format.
Yes, I
You
think
plural.
Jody also, I think, has a list of other local elected officials and former trustees. And we can use that I'm happy to send out the email, but just CC me on whatever you send to Jody, and then we can solicit and see if they would also like
Okay.
to add their names.
Thank you for writing it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Ashby.
It was difficult because when we thought about it last time, there was nothing, there was no action. It was in litigation, there was no action to be had.
Yeah.
But in the interim, action became.
And I think this is, when we get to formation of committees, I think this is something we're gonna talk about a little bit more in depth, is having an advocacy group that can help us find these call to actions on a regular basis and make sure we put them out in front of the community, but then also so that they can do some of the internal advocacy work we were talking about as far as like retention and staff, like responding to staff needs and things like that. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but when we do that, we'll circle back to this because I think this is sort of the opening salvo of us doing a little bit more intentional advocacy out to the community. All right, Ellsworth, I will turn it over to you for your executive director's report.
Thank you. So trying something a little bit different with the executive director's report, wrote out a narrative, tried to keep it brief. But I welcome feedback on format or content. If anybody has questions about what's included, I don't think we need to take the time to go back over it, but happy to answer questions. And the most significant piece is probably the proposal for policy review. This is a practice that I've used at previous libraries. I think it will feel different in the beginning because it will feel like we're kind of front loading some work. Past practice here has been more review as needed, which is totally valid. But this would give a couple advantages. One, getting every policy in front of every trustee on a regular basis. And another one, kind of taking the pressure off of those as needed reviews because we would have practice going forward. So I included proposal, example of what the template could look like for bringing things to the trustees, and also just as a reminder the policy that speaks to policy review. So,
And I know
questions and comments, welcome.
you recommended a 3-year review cycle, and I liked that because I don't think we'll get it done in 3 years, but that adds a little buffer space since we all have 4-year terms. So if we get to an incredibly intense budget season and we've got 1 or 2 meetings where we can't move things forward, we're not gonna be so behind that we can't get everything seen in.
So I don't want to be the one to throw a wrench in this. However,
Okay.
under state statute, we as a board have an obligation biannually, every 2 years, to look at any policies that deal with selection of library materials, use of the library materials, or use of the facilities. So while this is great staff-wise, we as a board have a statutory obligation to do it every 2 years.
So there are gonna be, not every policy,
Not every
but there are gonna be
policy,
some
those we
policies
need
that we
bring
have to look
front.
at.
And I'm gonna talk about that when I talk about governance, because that sort of came into looking at the statute, and what our 16 charges are, that came into it, but we do have an obligation biannually to look at
Okay.
those, so we need to think about that.
That makes sense because we have elections every 2 years, so that does make sense. Well, good, I think that still keeps us
It
looking
does.
at
It's just
everything
something
under
else,
4 years.
Yeah.
Yes,
And there's a component that I think would be helpful for those of kind of making a calendar of when the policy will be up for review that would allow easy access to, okay, when is the selection policy coming back up, because we know we have a responsibility. It also is a really good reminder that if a policy is brought forward, maybe it's gonna take 2 meetings to work through revisions. That's great, and it allows the board to see what that will impact in the future. So either we can reshuffle things, or we can add one to the next agenda. Just kind of gives a little visual clarity. And that's not something that we need to run in every packet if it felt like too much, but it could if that was.
Okay.
It also could be put on the board calendar if that was easier.
Oh, okay. How
Couple
many,
different options.
you said 77?
I believe there are 77 policies. There are some things in the policy, under the policy heading, that I think you could count in the policy or not. Some of them are sort of more statements or links to outside entity work, but 77 things are under the heading.
So this first go might be a little heavier while we decide whether or not something should or should not be in the pile to begin with. Okay.
I also think as we go through policy, there may be things that the group thinks, maybe it's time to sunset that, or maybe it's time to combine or break out. So I think especially the first round would have
Okay.
some, and this is, as Megan pointed out, there are a couple things that we are bound to do at a certain time. Outside of that, the 3 years was really a number that I thought put us at a balancing point of a good frequency, but not too much at each meeting.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
the other thing is if we get into this and it feels like the idea of doing 3 policies at a meeting is too much, that's fine, we can adjust.
Yeah, and we can just prioritize the ones that we have to do.
Yeah.
And obviously, if things came up that had a corresponding policy that needed immediate review, that can be put in. It's only as binding as this group wants it to be, so.
Okay.
I think it offers good flexibility. I also put in an advocacy update with just a couple of updates of things that we had sort of talked about at the last meeting. So,
I just want to thank you for including like a template, that was really helpful.
Yeah.
I really appreciate the format and the thoroughness of the report.
Great.
Fantastic. And I was also just gonna add that, a lot of these policies are already great, so I anticipate that some of them will sort of like read the policy and we concur that it's fine, it doesn't need, review, so I
I
think
totally,
perfect, like 77 sounds like a large number, but, given the state of things, it's just like, pretty high. It's very doable, so.
And there are definitely some that we've all kind of looked at and been like, yep, change that word, rubber stamp it, like, or, update some language and we're good. But there have definitely been some that like took some digging to rearrange, so. Do we want to cover that again once we get to talking about committees?
sure, if you'd like. And we could have a standing board committee if that's the direction that you guys would like to take. We also could pull in trustees as needed to staff committees. There's multiple ways to do it, and they're all valid, so I feel very flexible about it. Any of them that are under the board policy heading, of course, we would ask to have a trustee sit on the committee. Some of them, you may not want to have somebody from the board, so I think we can kind of feel that out. And if this feels like a process that we want to try, we could select some policies to bring to the next meeting and kind of try it in action and see how that feels.
Okay. Any other questions for Ellsworth on his executive director's report? All right, we'll move on to staff report, the strategic priorities report.
Okay, just a few things to highlight. In May, the middle and high school services and communication teams collaborated to produce a brief video showcasing library services, spaces, and resources for middle and high school students. The video is available on the library's YouTube channel, so I encourage you to take that out. Pretty fantastic. In children's services, staff are busy throughout May preparing for the June 1st launch of our Kids Summer Reading Program. This year's theme is Level Up at Your Library, and of course, as usual, participants are encouraged to engage in and track all kinds of reading. It goes through August 19th, and kids as young as 2 years old, as well as rising 6th graders can participate. They can win beads and stickers, and the bead strings that the kids who have been in the program for years, they're just unbelievable looking. So the kids really enjoy that. And so the first couple of weeks of the program, 1,500 kids signed up. And have already reported over 262,000 minutes of reading. So that's a very successful program. And then lastly, from April 21st to May 23rd, library staff participated in the Get a Move On Challenge. It was designed and promoted by the Wellbeing Committee. And 36 staff members, including myself, collectively started walking, and we moved an impressive 4,500 miles. So that was really great, got us from behind our desk and outside and walking with people, and so that was pretty fantastic.
I had a question under, so you've changed some of the collections signage to be more inclusive?
Yes, so, you know, in terms of how we kind of showcase and market collections, we always want to be thoughtful that we're using terminology that's inclusive. And so the collection librarians work with the various departments to make sure that we're always kind of looking at that signage and updating it as we need to.
Okay. Any big outstanding updates or big changes?
I don't think so, like, we're on it, we do it pretty regularly.
Okay.
So it's pretty timely, but yeah, I know Jenna, who does the children's collection, is always keeping an eye out for terminology that may or may not still be used, and thinking of terminology that we would like to introduce to the community.
Okay.
I have a question too. This business mentorship program is amazing and wonderful. What kind of utilization are we seeing on that program?
That I don't know, but I can go back and talk to Bridget and send you the information. Bridget is our business services librarian, and she's made incredible connections through the chamber and other Oak Park businesses. So we always like to highlight that, but I can ask her and then bring that information.
It would be great to make sure that people are hearing about that resource and using it. It's a fantastic idea.
Look to, about the facilities part, just learn more. I see Chiller 2 has a name, it's kind of nice stuff, but like it says Phase 5, I'm just curious, like, is there a facilities plan we can see one day, just,
Absolutely.
I was gonna say, we usually see that near budget season, so that we know why certain things are in the budget, so I would guess Matt's probably putting that together before he puts together his budget. Any other questions on the strategic priorities report? Then we will move to additions and separations.
I see here there's a new executive director.
Everybody else here is summer hires.
I don't think that the collection services part-time,
Oh,
20 hour, I think that that's
a
a regular permanent.
Okay,
The other is temporary.
okay. All right. Staff changes report, there were no noted staff changes. Any questions on staff reports before we move on to the financial reports? All right, financial reports it is, May 2025 financial report. What is this month? This is June. This is the May, okay, so 42.
I noticed a lot of tuition reimbursements. Is that line item used every year completely?
I don't.
I asked that same question, and I feel like the answer was yes.
Okay,
But
good.
We can verify that.
I mean, I think that's important, and I think that that's one, and how is it sort of advertised and staff know about it? And, I'm just curious about, to me, that's an important thing for,
I think historically, I don't know if we've like financially met the threshold, but I know there's always been like good engagement, and Billy's been pretty good about making sure people know, like, if somebody expresses, hey, I'd like to do this, proactively going and saying, like,
Great.
hey, there is an option for this as
Yeah.
part of their onboarding and all that good stuff.
I mean, I think we should probably, to me, it seems like a staff thing that should be maxed out if we can. I mean, if it's not, just to, proactively
Yeah.
look for people, because it is, a great benefit that working in a professional building, and let's get more people in the profession.
It's definitely covered in orientation, and I think that it's one of those benefits that department managers also try to amplify in their meetings, and then our staff who are utilizing it, sort of finding ways to celebrate that.
That's awesome. That's great. That's important.
What is the art fund?
So the art fund, I believe that is a fund that was started when we built and opened the building to pay for permanent art. And so I think that's in an interest gaining account. Since we brought in the art collection under special collections, we also use a special collections budget for the art. And it's usually things like conservation, or once in a while, if we have to move a piece of art, we will hire art movers.
Gotcha,
Like that.
thank you.
Overall, everybody on the library side is feeling pretty comfortable with where the budget numbers are.
I was gonna say 41% doesn't scare me with this being May, so.
Yeah.
42% of the year that we close.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty on target. I'm not great at that, but it's close.
And there are some times of the year, just because we pay upfront for certain things, or that these numbers will get a little bit misaligned, but that is usually because we made some sort of lump sum contribution to something specifically that moves these around. So if anything ever looks like it's not mathing, look at what the specific thing is, and then we can ask the staff if there was something that we did that covers like the whole year. Like, I think it's February always looks a little bit wonky because we pay a lot of things up front in January, and then February looks a little, what are we already at, like 25, 30%, because we've paid a lot of things, especially with insurance and those kinds of things up front. So
I did have another question. I was wondering, there's only 3% of the expenditure for equity and anti-racism has been utilized, and I'm wondering if it was just about kind of getting you on board, and that has been kind of on hold, and if so, what are the plans for the second half of the year?
Yeah, so that's reflective of there being a vacancy there, and then sort of pausing for the next director. I think that we will look at some all-staff training using those resources, and my guess is that we will be able to expand those before the end of the year. I think that we're looking at some training options already, and trying to figure out how much of that would be internally facing and how much of that would be externally facing. So I'm confident we're gonna apply this and come together.
Great. Thank you.
And I think, Lee, this might be a question for you, but previously there have been funds towards anti-racism and equity programs that came from other departments. So using funds from the children's department, if it is something specifically geared towards children's, even if it falls under the heading of equity and anti-racism. So the 3% is just specific to that specific line item. It doesn't mean like no funds have gone into that.
That is correct.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Resolution and disbursements, any questions there? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve the May 2025 resolutions and disbursements.
Motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Resolutions and disbursements approved. And intergovernmental reports, I don't think we're gonna have a whole lot on these. I think I have a couple of notes. iGov, and we'll talk about potential appointments in the unfinished business. But it does look like Christina will be the chair for iGov. So that will be moving forward. We know at least she will be representing the library there. Their meetings are the third Saturday of every month from 9 to 10 a.m. and they are virtual. So I don't have an update from the actual last iGov meeting. COG, the June meeting for COG was canceled. The next meeting will be Wednesday, September 4th, 8 a.m. And I intend to attend that meeting, but obviously no actual update since the June meeting was canceled.
So it's quarterly then, those meetings?
I think it's meant to be every other month, but it's summer. So I think they just kicked the can to September when people will actually be here.
Gotcha, okay.
Planet Green. Again, I do not have an update. Do we have an update from Matt?
No, other than, the meeting date was supposed to be the 19th, but of course everyone is closed, and so he will let us know when the next one is.
Fantastic, okay. So let me just, I'll see, Annie, now I'm having the same problem you did. My brain is macking, not,
Not chroming.
it's not chroming, it's macking.
New verbs that we just made up.
English is like that. You can just turn nouns into verbs and verbs into nouns, it's fine. Do we know, do they meet monthly?
I believe they meet monthly.
Do they always send a monthly email? Because I found that email really helpful. Because that just, we have some new trustees and we'll let you know what we're doing. It's very helpful.
Planet Green meets monthly on third Thursdays from 8:30 to 9:45. And apparently they're all virtual except December.
You said third Thursday.
Third Thursday, 8:30 a.m. to 9:45 a.m.
Virtual, okay, good deal. Friends, their last meeting was on the 16th. I was unable to attend, but they will have a meeting every other month on the third Monday at 7 p.m. The update there is obviously the book fair that we have on our calendar. They're already accepting donations, saw lots and lots of books of donations. Do we know when they're gonna start setting up? Is it like that week or?
They usually do it that week.
Okay.
I attended that meeting and they did note that donations are a little bit low for where we are right now this year, so
Okay.
if anybody is so inclined to share the, share posts and things like that,
Okay.
soliciting donations. I think that there's often a dip before, I think there's sort of a push at the end of the donation acceptance period. Because people are like, oh, I heard about it, but I have a little time, and then at the end of it, people will come forward.
Can you remember when is the donation period window closing?
I don't remember, but I remember.
I'm thinking there are a lot of block parties happening, including ours later this weekend, and I'm sure that people would love, like if one person had, in the block party had
A book bin to.
like a book bin, like appointed to like collect donations, I'm sure people would love that.
They're collecting to, oh.
So it looks like carry-in donations end June 28th. But the open books bin that is on the side of the library is open anytime.
Okay.
People can drop that off there.
I'll do it on my own block party this weekend.
Okay, we will eventually have, I think, some additional reports that go here. And just full disclosure, Ellsworth and I did talk about sort of juggling the order in which we do these things so that some of these reports are closer to the call to action that would be a trustee comment. So we'll think about if there is another more logical order so that if the public is not able to watch our full meeting, we can get the things that we want to ask the public to do at the very front end of the meeting, and then they can drop off for, budget chit chats and all that good stuff. But we'll see if that works, if we feel like changing the order is necessary, or if having the reports right before unfinished business is gonna be more useful. Speaking of unfinished business, formation of committees. So we just have this as a discussion item, and last time we talked about 3 committees specifically. So a finance committee, a governance committee, and then a personnel/transition committee, which is feeling a little bit more like it would be an advocacy type committee. So those are the 3 that we have right now. I think, and Ellsworth, you can correct me if you disagree, right now we should see how these function and then build out the scaffolding on how to maintain them so that we can see if we do indeed want to keep all 3, or if we feel like some of these could be, because we've already done, personnel committee to transition committee to advocacy committee to. So getting these started and making sure this is actually what we want, and then starting to build a scaffolding around those. Ellsworth, you had some information on finance and governance committees and what the expectations are generally around those.
Yes, and just as a reminder, in the bylaws, there's a reference to sort of ad hoc or as needed committees, and I think that gives a lot of freedom to let things ebb and flow as needed, so you can make choices as to how formal you want all of these pieces to be, which is great. I did some benchmarking, looking at how other public libraries have approached these committees, and just kind of pulled together the trends, I would say. So when I looked at descriptions of finance committees, what was I seeing over and over? And most of them seem to be focused on reviewing financial documents and reports and giving feedback on effectiveness of that reporting. So if we're doing cover sheet memos for the expenditures, but that actually doesn't make sense to people, that's a committee that could say, let's take this apart and start over. Contributing to budget-related conversations, reviewing relevant board policies, and in some cases drafting the budget for the full board's review. So working with staff to put together that financial package to bring to the full board. In my experience, one of the most powerful parts of the finance committee is going through the financial reports in the board packet, and then it sort of gives the rest of the trustees confidence to know that a small group has talked about this with staff, has identified any major questions before the meeting, and then there doesn't need to be so much time at the meeting speaking about them. At my last library, the finance committee, after we tried a few different things, met quarterly before the quarterly financial reports were produced, because those were a little bit more varied than the month-to-month reporting. But the board could think about if the intention was to start with monthly meetings or less than that, kind of feel it out. And I think what Virginia said about seeing how things function is a really key part of this, because we've got new voices at the table and we want to make it work. With governance, the overlaps I saw were leading process of bylaw and board review policy, participating in trustee orientation and training, ensuring compliance with laws and ethical standards related to libraries, and evaluating board effectiveness overall. Advocacy committee, this is something that's newer. There weren't as many examples of this, but amplifying the library's voice in the community, building relationships with elected officials and community leaders, raising awareness about the library's services and impacts, working on community engagement, and crafting advocacy statements. So I think that this board is already doing much of that work without a label on it. I did also look for examples of personnel committees, and while I didn't find a lot to benchmark against sort of in the wild, the Illinois State Library does have a statement on what personnel committees could do, and their statement is, the personnel committee shall be comprised of 2 members of the board of library trustees, including the president and the library director. The personnel committee's responsibilities include, but are not limited to, preparation of the annual review of the library director for discussion among the full board prior to the formal review, assisting the library director in the preparation of his or her annual statement of goals and objectives for the coming year, and assuming the leadership role in the resolution of any personnel conflict that cannot be resolved by the library director. The library director is responsible for the annual review of all of our library employees. So again, that's just from the state library, their draft out. And I looked at a few examples of transition committees. They were so different that it didn't feel
Okay.
relevant to write up a description. And these, again, are just sort of the trends I'm seeing. I think the most important thing is that the committees of this board meet the needs of this board. So if that means it's completely unique, so be it.
Before we dive into individual committee conversations, any statements, any discussion?
Question slash comment. At some point, we discussed the possibility of reviewing the bylaws, and so would this be a separate committee or that fall under the governance committee?
I think it would
Yeah.
fall under the governance.
Oh, I think, okay. I would say, well, I mean, part of it was, so I did some of the work you did, because I had governance, which was one committee, but then as I started doing it, it sort of became meta, it sort of being, governance is the committee on committees, right? It becomes like a bigger thing. And so when I started doing it, one of my thoughts was, and this isn't, is that maybe the bylaw committee could be an ad hoc committee, because we haven't looked at, was it 2017? Like, it's gonna be a heavy lift this year to do the bylaws, and then maybe not have that be a standing committee, but then have it merge into the policy/bylaw committee. But that right now, maybe we need to spend some time
Looking at the bylaws.
And ILA publishes a book, it's Illinois Library Law, and I don't know if it's just the law or if there's annotations and commentary. I don't think we have it. At Swan, we have it other places, but I don't think we do, but double check my cataloging and searching skills. But it's like a $50 book. It'd probably be worth us having if we redo the bylaws in our
So,
sort of,
yeah.
so we don't have to call the lawyers, because some of this stuff we can just.
We don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, we can just, we'll have the laws in front of us. And anyway, but that's, sorry, I got a little into this because I got to, because like I said, it was like governance, it's like committee on committees on committees on committees. It became, bigger than that.
I think I have a copy of that book in my office if you want to take a look at it.
Okay, I'm just saying, I think we should have it on hand.
Yeah.
If we're gonna have a bylaw committee, it should be in there. That's fine, if we have one.
We've purchased some for staff, so we can get a couple more copies for the board.
Perfect. And is it annotations and commentary, or is it just,
I think it's annotations and commentary.
That's
I
what
haven't
we
spent much time with it, but.
that's what we need?
So is your thought behind a governance committee being,
I know.
Rewinding.
It's a lot.
my thought on the governance committee was they would start primarily with bylaws, but then also helping with making this schedule for the policy
Policies.
review.
Yeah, it could
And then
definitely be that.
for- I'm thinking we start with the lighter policies to kind of get ourselves some positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
But then some of the heavier could go through the governance committee before coming to the front.
Right, and that's the whole thing, right? Like, and you said this elsewhere, the thing about committees, and we have no standing committees now, and I don't know
Right.
if you have, it does a lot, I think it would do a lot of the lifting it'll make these meetings shorter.
Yes.
And some of the work will be done, because some of us have already sat through longer meetings, and then we can, with staff or without, present these sort of ideas of what has already been hashed out, and we don't have to rehash every line by line of the bylaw. So I just think having committees is better governance, right? Like, so it's like it becomes on
No,
top of each other.
I'm actually really excited because in the past, some of these things have been so in-depth here with 7 people.
Yes.
That it
It's
takes
unnecessary.
a really long time when I feel like we all trust each other enough that if essentially half of us
But
are
also,
doing the
yeah, well,
deep dive
2 or 3 of us
first.
have already hashed it out, then we're one voice before we even bring it before everybody else,
Exactly.
and so it makes it, it's just, yeah.
And it's not searching through all the things, it's more, talk to me
Yeah.
about what you found and what you think, and then we can go from there.
And like I said, I did some of the work too, because what I did was I went through the statute, and I looked at the 16 things, we have 16 things that we're supposed to do, and I divided them into categories, And of the 16, 6 have to do with building real estate. So we might want to think about a building committee. I mean, just if that's 16 of the things we're supposed to do. I mean, 6 of the 16. 4 have to do with policy and bylaws. 4 have to do with fiscal and budget. 1 has to do with board membership. So I want to be a member of ILA. It's we have to join professional association. And then 1 is personnel. And all the personnel basically says is it's our job to hire, fire, and set the salary for a librarian that then does everyone else. So anyway, that's just another way to break it down with which, you know, we can do our own thing, of course, but if we look at what the 16 things we're charged with, that's sort of what they broke into. And I was surprised so many were building real estate, eminent domain.
Yeah, I had not even thought about,
I mean, I don't know if we want to do that, but like if this building is gonna have a bunch of capital changes, so it's, and it literally is, I mean, some of these things are like eminent domain and like negotiating real estate deals and, you know, but if it is 6 of the 16, we might want to think about it.
And maybe building can fit under finance or being ad hoc, because I know that's coming up right now, but I don't know how much.
I'd almost like to
after
take a look at it after we look at the budget,
Yeah,
so we know what building things
Yeah,
are the
I mean-
most eminent.
so that's just the way I broke it down, just like objectively, so.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for
Super
looking at
helpful.
Yeah, well,
Thank
this is kind of what I do for a living, right?
You're like, this is my wheelhouse,
Yeah,
folks.
exactly. That's like-
This is what we trained for. Awesome.
So, I'm not a lawyer, but I help the lawyers find the things they can't find, so. Here are your 16 things.
Okay, so I'm feeling like a governance committee with a beginning focus on bylaws and policies.
Agreed.
Today is just a discussion piece, so I will say, folks who want to be a part of this governance committee and or would like to chair this governance committee, reach out to me over the next month. My hope is that in July, we can make sure that we have at least beginning parts of the committee. Megan, since you did the deep dive on the governance committee, I would also like your opinion on potentially what staff members
Yeah, okay.
we would like to have involved, and then we will run that through,
Okay.
if that is possible. Or
Yeah,
if
I'm
they
not-
have,
I feel like it should be a
Other
two-way street, too. Yeah, two-way street too, like on
Mhm.
what, you know, you think would be, who you would,
who we want to have.
yeah, I mean, I would like to, and the other thing we have to remember too is all of these are subject to open meetings because they're subsidiaries of the
Yes,
board.
they will.
So whether there's 1 member, 5 members, they're all subject to open meetings.
But that's great, because that means if anybody else
Totally.
just wants to come by
Totally, I
and
just
hang
think we have
out.
to, I just remember when you were talking about the personnel committee last time, you were talking about 2 people, but like in Illinois, that doesn't count. It doesn't matter if it's just me sitting here by myself. If I'm a subsidiary of this board, I'd be under the owl.
I was gonna say, we'd have other questions.
Yeah, exactly.
Alright, so bylaws and.
But yeah, I will, I mean, because I think it should probably be a two-way street rather than me suggesting, because I'd rather hear what you guys have to say about who you think would
Okay.
be.
All right, Finance Committee, Mr. Finance Officer, what are your opinions on,
I like everything you said, actually, and I know budget season's coming around, so I think it's a great time to get started.
winter
and-
is indeed coming,
Yes,
yes.
and whoever wants to be on the board, like, you know, I know it was usually the finance officer, but I like the idea of it being open to whomever we want to have on the committee, and then I imagine we already kind of know who the staff component of this is, because this was sort of an ad hoc, I mean, sort of informally a committee anyway. So I think we start with that, right, and see how it goes if we want to continue for it to be a standing committee.
Okay. I know I am meant to name who is on these committees. I will do that, but as a finance officer, I would like you to choose who is on your committee.
I figured like it would be an obligation for the finance officer to be on the committee, that would be weird.
I mean, I feel like that's a given.
Yes. I wasn't gonna, I name people, no, I just assumed people were gonna reach out to you and say. if they
Okay.
wanna be on the committee.
Okay, so
Or
we'll
do you want
do,
them to reach out to me for that one?
it's up to you. I mean, this is the one committee where we already have a very, very designated board member.
Yeah, and staff member.
Yeah, so I'm open to, I mean, I know I have the obligation of like doing the naming, but if you want to run with how this is put together, I'm happy to do that and just, you know,
Well,
rubber
I'll work
stamp
with
things.
Ellsworth, you know, I still owe you a one-on-one, so when I'm, you know, I'll hit you up on email and we can figure out something.
Okay.
One of the other things that I saw too, another, is sometimes in the bylaws, it is codifying the standing committees, so we might wanna think about that too. Whether we wanna, you know, codify,
Bylaws.
yeah, in the bylaws, it will say these are our standing committees, and the head of the finance committee is always the finance officer,
Yeah.
you know, just, that's something to think about too.
But that was another thing that Ellsworth and I talked about, that these 3 committees feel like they're loose enough they could live in perpetuity.
Yeah, standing committee.
Standing, yeah.
Even if we go from monthly to quarterly, maybe they should just always
Yeah.
exist.
That's why I think it's probably worth thinking about putting in the bylaws, so that as time goes on, they don't just sort of die.
Yeah, so that might be,
Just a thought, I mean, that's obviously down the
Another-
road, but that's just another, this is where governance becomes, like I said.
I was gonna say, it's like a turducken, like we have to do the committees to see if they work, to
Yeah,
put them in the
this is what I
bylaws.
was like, as I started doing this, I'm like, this is kind of all of it.
Bylaws have to be made by a committee.
It's a committee.
It's definitely a good idea too, because it's like if you say in the bylaws, finance officer, this is your responsibility, so when
Mhm.
somebody
Exactly.
raises their hand to do it, they know what they're getting into.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely agree, and if like finance ends up being like more of a seasonal one based around the budget time,
Mhm.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
and
it
we
being a
don't-
standing committees.
We don't have to put in the bylaws exact, you know, when they meet, just some outline of like, we have these standing committees, it's at least 2 members, and the finance, you know, officer is always the chair of this committee. Like that's, I mean, it doesn't have, but just,
I think it would also be helpful for us to outline which staff members we want, so that
yeah.
as we hire people, they also know what they're getting
That's
into.
very
You're going to have to
yeah.
sit on these committees with these board members, it's gonna be different people every 2 years, like how do you feel about that?
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, if we're going to decide that these things are, at least our starter standing committees, then we should go through the effort of putting at least enough scaffolding around them that the
Yeah.
staff knows how to handle them, but that we leave ourselves enough wiggle room that if y'all only meet twice a year, we haven't violated our own bylaws.
Right.
That's fair. But yeah, I'll reach out.
Okay. The last committee that we discussed, which I said has kind of changed names a few times, I'm now going to start referring to as an advocacy committee. And the reason behind that is advocacy is broad enough that it can address in-house and in-community things. So this would be a group that could discuss, you know, we've all discussed, like, we lost a lot of BIPOC folks working here. This group could help look into that. This group could also help with putting together our call to action, as long as it is related to advocacy for the staff, the community, libraries in general. It could be something that sits with this committee. We could have specific standing items like the call to action. You know, the committee's responsibility is to bring us one thing that we want the community to do at every meeting, but then we could task out other things that we, as a board, decide this needs to be handled, but to your point, like, we don't all need to sit here and you know, trudge through it. Let's ask the advocacy committee to do the first layer of work and bring us back some suggestions. Does that feel in line with something we as a board feel comfortable trying to staff and run on a regular basis, or do we feel like that would be too much of a heavy lift?
I like it.
I am in full favor.
Yeah.
I have slight concerns.
Okay.
My only concern is mission creep, right? I just wanna make sure, like you said, it's focused on the library. I don't want it to get into a situation where we as board members are doing things that sort of scope outside of the library, because there's enough work to do here that I think we really need to make sure focus on advocacy for things for the library. So like, for example, when we have this statement, if there really isn't a call to action at this moment, I don't wanna start having performative or,
Yeah.
you know, hyperbole, and like, then people will ignore us, right? Because if we're constantly doing it. And if we sort of creep out into issues that aren't specifically related to the library, then we're doing too much. And if you're doing everything, you do nothing, right? So that's my only concern about it, is that I really think we have to make sure that that group stays
Very
focused
focused.
on the library and.
That's a good point, because right now there's a lot of
Right, there's a
action to
lot.
call
I mean,
on,
you know,
but hopefully in the future there will maybe be less, and then how do we pivot this group? So,
Right, and like
okay.
I said, so it's the two things, right? I don't want to have to do so much that nobody thinks that anything, you know, not so much that we can't do anything, and I don't want it to be so much that it becomes just noise to people. And they're like, oh, there's the library again telling us something, instead of being like, oh, this is important, we need to pay attention. So,
Yeah, and I think you're right, the scope for a specific call to action needs to be very much in line with
yeah,
what you guys wrote, which is, this is specifically related to libraries, this is how it's going to impact the Oak Park Public Library specifically, and this is what we would like you to do about it. If what we want you to do about it is, please show up to a program next month, maybe that's
yeah,
all it is, but
yeah. I
yeah,
mean,
it needs
that's-
to be very focused.
Show up to this program at our library, you know, promoting our library, yes, I think that's.
Okay,
And I think it's best practice for all of the committees to be really well defined about like what the parameters are, so.
Yeah, I just think this is the only one where I mean, I don't think fiscal's gonna start spending money. Spending other people's money. I'm not writing bylaws for the park district, like, you know, I mean, it's the only one that has potential, I think that's why I said that, but I agree.
I mean, yeah, I guess to your point, because like some of the way I see it, the advocacy committee could also have like right? Like it's like the community has to be happy with us, and so like the community might come and say, we have these concerns, or we have, and so I see what you're saying, where it can get messy.
Yeah.
And so.
it might be up to the advocacy committee to say like, yes, we all
This is-
personally
this-
agree with that, but that's not a library
Right,
board.
this doesn't affect the health of the library.
Right.
But like this does. So I think that's a very valid thing to think about.
Okay, I'm going to put a note here about organic scope creep. Annie, do you still want to volunteer as tribute for sort of looking at what the scope of this would be and coordinating with Ellsworth on who from staff would perhaps be involved?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then lather, rinse, repeat like the other two committees. If you are interested in being on this committee, let me know. And then we'll discuss appointments. Colin, Megan, and Annie, please let me know how many board members and how many staff members you think should be a part of the committee, even if that's a range of like 2 to 3 or whatever. And we'll go from there. Did I miss something?
No, I think that's a great start.
All right, so that's gonna be our start for formation of committees. I will sometime this week or next week try to do another recap email for everybody on what everybody's homework is and reminders on if you wanna raise your hand and volunteer to reach out. Righty, Ellsworth, you had some information on board training options.
Yes, I met with Britt Isley from Ellsworth to talk about what offerings for training are available through this firm. He suggested doing a training that takes the form of sort of a mock meeting, where he and some colleagues would go through the whole process of a meeting that would cover things like open meetings, Robert's rules, things like that. So we had a good conversation. I asked him for pricing information and sort of those other logistical details, and once I hear back from him on that, we can nail down a little bit more. I think there's huge advantage to working with Ellsworth on this training because they're the firm that we would go to with questions or concerns or need for representation. So that feels good to me. It was great to meet with Britt face to face and kind of start building that relationship. I think that he could do a really effective job. Also, if we did that and it felt like maybe we want more detailed training on open meetings or Robert's rules or a different component of this work, I think they could either offer more or they could possibly recommend other places to get that training.
Okay.
Virginia had asked about expanding that training to offer it to other area boards. I did ask that in my email to do it, to sort of what would the comfort level be with that? How would that change other pieces of it? And when I hear back, I'll let you know what I learned, but I think that would be a great place to start in terms of training, everybody along with confidence coming together as a new group.
You said he would cover OMA, Robert's Rules, was FOIA on that list?
I'm not sure if we talked specifically about FOIA, but I can remind him that we need that. I asked to sort of look at the fundamental pieces of board work. So in that mock meeting, there may be components of those pieces, but anything specific we can give him in advance.
Okay.
And if his response was, okay, that doesn't actually fit with the scope of this kind of training, but we could do it as a separate event. And he was describing it as an in-person training. There's always the opportunity, if we need to do more, that some of it could be done virtually or however would be the easiest for the group.
But wouldn't that itself be subject to open meeting?
Yeah, but if we give a Zoom link, why would that, can we do that? Can we have to,
Yes.
Yeah, and you know what, that might be something that's actually informative for the community too. I mean, we're talking about, she's talking about people not, not being able to run for office or not knowing what it's like to be on a board or limited people, like, it could be something that people would want to learn about.
Yeah, so it would be an open meeting. And Britt sort of said a similar thing about if somebody in the community is driven to learn about library governance, that's great.
Yeah.
It would,
I know.
I don't think that's funny, but okay. Yeah, I mean,
No, there probably will be some, I mean, not just library governance, but I think we're a good example of local governance in
Right.
general.
exactly.
And the fact that we would be offering it even if other, groups are not, I don't think that's a bad thing. And to be completely transparent, my offer to invite other trustees in was completely selfish, help to defer the cost, and
Right.
also so that we can meet other area trustees, because again, circling back to this call to action, we need friends who have similar outlooks, and being able to offer something like this would help us make sure that we're all on the same page with some other local trustees.
I really appreciate that idea.
So I know it says action item, but I feel like our action is be very patient and wait for Ansel to tell us how much this will cost. And then we can decide from there if we feel like this is something in the budget, or if we really do need to reach out to other friends and partners to help.
And there's also, I mean, I'm not, this is a fantastic idea, but there are also consultants that do library board training specifically as well. So I mean, that's also, they probably are cheaper. That's what
Do you think they're gonna be cheaper than
They're not attorney?
the attorneys that we already have?
No, they're not attorneys. I mean, they're consultants who do.
No, that's what I'm saying, like the attorneys we already have.
I don't know, I'm just
Versus-
saying, it's
okay.
just to budget it out. I'm just saying, if this,
If Ansel Blink's number comes back as being uncomfortable, then we can look at some other consultants.
yeah.
I do think Ellsworth has a point that if we mess any of these things up, Ansel Blink is
No,
who has to come hang out with us.
I'm the one that brought statute here. I'm completely fine. I think that's
You're
great.
clearly comfortable.
I'm totally comfortable, but I'm just saying for pricing, it doesn't mean that it's either them or nothing. There's probably some other groups that,
Because we have to have something.
we have to have
We have to have,
something.
yeah.
That's part of governance too.
And I really don't think self-guided is, I will be very honest, we've tried self-guided.
Yeah.
We're trying this now.
But everybody still has to do their open meetings and FOIA
Yes.
training.
I have not, I need to put that on my list.
Put it on your list. It takes
Because I
longer than you think.
have not looked for
It's
that
like 180
email.
I will also say Rails does offer great training too. I actually did a live webinar with them on library director evaluations a couple weeks ago. It was very, very good. So, and they keep those webinars, so that's another place to go. And I've seen Ansel Glink do presentations and open meetings back there too, so just for the rest of you.
I think we had hoped that the action would be setting a date, but since we don't have things firmed up, that's probably the answer.
Okay, so we will Hold on today.
So when will we set the date?
I think once we get pricing information,
We're
we
just
can
doing
decide
another
if it's doable, and we could, yeah, we can talk about it. I think a doodle polls seem to be working. I know they're not the most elegant tool, but it works.
Works out for you.
And
Did the wrong one, but.
You did the wrong poll?
They work.
That's okay.
I think we sent two out.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
two.
They were close.
So I see why that would have been. So, once we get information back, I will engage with Virginia on talking about does this make sense financially and otherwise, and then that will also give us the length of the training and some other details that will be helpful for
Great.
and then we can find a date.
Speaking of finding a date, strategic planning session doodle, did we have?
Yes, thank you everyone for filling it out. We got all of, every board member, every leadership team member. There are at least 2 dates where most of us can attend. There wasn't one where like everyone was available. But I will send out an email to the board, with 2 or 3 dates to see if like maybe people can reschedule around them. If not, we can push it later or we can choose another day in the evening. I know I kind of chose like a Saturday or Sunday, but we can open that up if we don't have consensus on one day.
But you said we've got like 2 or 3 dates.
Where everyone but like maybe 1 or 2 said they were available.
Do you want to talk through it now?
I'm torn because I don't want to talk about who can't make it if it's staff members. I feel if it were us, then I don't care.
There is one date where I think you actually were the only person that was unavailable.
Well, I think that's the day we pay.
Can't always serve.
You guys send me the notes.
So August 3rd, which is a Sunday from 9 to 1 p.m.
Okay. Let me see what I can juggle. What were the other dates that we had?
Let's see, I believe August 2nd had 3 people who were unavailable. And then there was, I think the 9th, there are 4 people unavailable.
Okay.
And there are big advantages to doing this early in the budget cycle, but it can be pushed. You know, if the idea is we want everyone there, or even we want every trustee, and then as many staff as can figure out, we could send out another poll. I think that making sure everybody feels comfortable with the process is important, and this is a new group, it is together, so we want to do it right.
I refuse to be the holdup. If everybody else can do the 3rd, I will make the 3rd work.
9 to 1?
9 to 1, yes.
So we listed that as an action. I don't know if you want to do a vote or if you want your declaration to be the action.
Ooh, I don't like declarations. Okay, I know we did a doodle poll, but that was not a vote. So, moving to, I'm entertaining a motion to have our library strategic meeting from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. on August 3rd, 2025. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Do I have a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. All right, there's our action.
I presume this happens here.
I was just gonna say, now that we have a date, we can
Yeah.
find a space.
Okay,
And I did talk to Brett Isley a little bit about this too, about what are the options for open versus closed, et cetera. If the board is there, this is gonna be an open meeting. Virginia suggested doing an open meeting with all of the parts that you need to do, so we're gonna post it ahead of time, we're going to have the agenda up, the meeting would be open to everyone to be present, and then there would be minutes, but that there would not be a recording of the meeting, which I feel like might be the most appropriate for this type of meeting. The tone of it will be different, whether there is an audience names or not. And that's okay. So I think that we may need to talk through what exactly that will look like. I haven't heard back from Britt with that specific question,
Okay.
but when I did a review of materials around it, it seemed like that would be fine.
I know the other thing we discussed is if we happen to show up and, have an audience of thousands, we would decide which items maybe need to go to a closed session, versus if there are 5 people here, we may still feel comfortable discussing those since there wouldn't be a recording. So once we have an agenda a little bit tighter, sort of tiering it to say like, hey, if we have a lot of folks here, or if we're for some reason expecting a lot of public comment, because it is a public board meeting, if folks feel like our strategic session is a place where they want to come and make broad public comment on what they want our strategy to be, then there may be things that, we're not going to get to before 1 o'clock that we have to, kick the can down the road either to a secondary strategic session or one of our fantastic new committees can handle those pieces. So we'll have to take a look at the agenda and see what things absolutely have to be handled between 9 and 1, and what things either may need to go to a closed session or may need to move to a regular meeting if we can't cover them.
And the most likely thing that would come up to be in a closed session would be speaking directly about opposition or person. And I could imagine the DEI position coming up as a topic that people want to talk more in depth about. So we would just have the pieces in place in case we needed to shift into recording. And of course, the idea of not recording would not be because we don't want to be transparent. We want to be transparent. We want to be clear that the public is invited to this. This is a sensitive undertaking, and I think we also want to balance that with the ability of being able to speak very candidly and being able to dig into topics that require vulnerability. And while the board, by assuming the selected role, says I'm open to doing this in front of my community, I think it also makes sense to be strategic in how we use our tools. And we want the time to be meaningful both for public to learn what's happening and for board activity. Of course, there would be full minutes taken and all those pieces.
I will also say it is usually a little bit messy. I feel like the community will benefit more from once we clean those things up and those individual pieces come to meetings as action items, or something comes of them, rather than like looking at our word cloud and what did we write on the whiteboard and who said what about what. It's like Elsa said, it's not like a normal meeting. And so I think for folks who are not already looking at all the pieces and parts, it will be easy, it will be more accessible for the community once we put it into a regular meeting agenda, which is something that we can prioritize from the minutes, saying these are the things that came out of it, this is when we plan to address them in regular meetings. And that way, nobody feels like they have to, again, sit and watch a 4-hour library board meeting session.
Yeah, I highly doubt anyone's really, well, in the past, how have these been attended? Strategic.
I mean, somebody came by and got something out of the vending machine last time, but not at all.
I don't think we have.
Like nobody has ever, in my time doing the strategic, like nobody's ever from the community just attended. I think maybe one time we had public comment, but it was because it was a board meeting and somebody came and made like regular public comment, but they're not attended.
Yeah.
I mean,
Maybe a journalist or something comes.
I think that's even a stretch, unless we're planning to do something really fun and exciting, which I think it's gonna be forming committees.
It's exciting to us.
Only I think that's what I'm saying. That's
We
my
are
jam.
not normal, okay? All right, so the last piece of unfinished business is board liaison appointments. I had a few folks raise their hands. So I will speak to the people that I have so far and confirm those. And then we can talk more about where we have other folks. And then I'd like to do it all at once, but if not, we can appoint some folks now as the action item and then fill in the rest later. Okay. So for iGov, Christina will be chair, and then Annie, you have also thrown your hat in the ring. Did not have any other volunteers. Was anybody else interested in doing iGov specifically? Well, that there was easy, okay. COG, I will be attending. Do not have anybody else who's thrown their hat in the ring. If anyone wants to come hang out with me at 8 AM on Wednesdays. Okay. I may ask for somebody else to buddy with me on that just because I don't like us being single-threaded anywhere. But I will go ahead and put myself in for COG for now, and then if somebody else would like to come along, I would highly recommend that somebody come along with. Planet Green, Megan, you said you were
I know, but I
interested.
don't, now that I know the meeting time, I have regular meetings Wednesdays and Thursdays mornings at work, so I can't.
Okay,
I'm interested, but I can't.
Just that's a tricky time.
Yeah, and so is the Wednesday morning, like,
I do have some opinions on the COG meeting time that I think I will be asking about, because Wednesday at 8 AM means you can kind of neither have a job nor children.
right, that's what it is. I mean, if it's, I mean, I would be willing to do it, and when you gave the time, I was like,
Yeah, so that is something I'm probably going to ask about, if there's
Okay.
willingness to
well, let me know.
reschedule now that there are other people. I don't know how well-established Planet Green is and whether or not they would be willing to move things around. We do for now have a staff member, Matt, who goes. So can we ask for now that Matt provide a monthly update until we find a board member who can, okay.
That is, and I did ask staff about staff involvement in these groups as well, and Planet Green probably had the most robust response in terms of Matt attending, and then the environmental sustainability specialist on staff also attends at least quarterly. So there, if there's gonna be one that we have a gap, I think that's
Okay. Friends, so I have thrown my hat in for Friends as well, although if somebody else would like to, I'm happy to step aside. Is anybody else interested in Friends meetings
Third Monday, 8 AM.
at 7 PM?
I'll say yes, because of shared load, third Monday.
How many do you need for friends?
I don't think there's I would like at least 2. I don't think there's like a cap. I think we would just need to be cognizant of OMA if there are 3 of us. So probably capping at 2. However, if you would like to do Friends, I will step aside and we can do Friends.
Yeah, I'll do friends, because you're friends other times.
So Thursday, sorry,
Third Monday.
Third Monday.
so that would, in the next third Monday, the third Monday of every month, I don't know why I'm asking you. Yeah, is that right? Yeah.
I think so. We'll probably need to check and see if they intend to have a meeting right after the book sale or if they plan to skip that one.
Okay.
And I can't go.
Yeah, I'll, because they emailed us, Friends about 4th of July, so, so I'll just, I'll email,
Okay.
see what's.
And Mika, if you can't go to that one specifically, let me know and I'll see if I can jump in so that there's at least 2 of us there, but I will.
I can't.
Okay.
Because I'll be in Japan.
Okay. Out with Purpose. So this is the renamed Opalga group. We do not currently have anyone representing the library there. Suzanne has traditionally been our contact to Opalga. And so she has also volunteered for this, and then Annie, you tentatively,
Yeah, I said I would do 9 you know, if need be, I didn't quite understand like when they met and what it entailed. And so
I
it was
don't
more
think
like
it's
pivot to
hard and
something.
fast when they meet yet. And also, we have never had a liaison, like a named liaison to this group. This is a new group that we would want to have a permanent presence. So not a lot of rules, not a lot of
We'll figure
anything
it out.
established.
Yeah.
So if you feel like you can do that kind of very nebulous lift on something that doesn't have a lot of definition around it yet,
Yeah.
then wonderful. If you feel like that's gonna be too much doing that and iGov, then we can look at,
Yeah. I'm happy to do it for now, and then if it's not working, we can change. I just wasn't clear when they're meeting, do we know when they're meeting?
we don't know yet.
Yeah.
Suzanne will get that information from, I think, Cass later in the summer for when the next meeting is.
That's good.
All right, and then collaboration for early childhood. Currently, we have Christina as a liaison there. This is also, I think, the formality of this, I believe, is new. But Lee, have we had staff members?
We have quite a few staff members
Okay.
that work with the collaboration
Okay.
in different capacities.
Okay, so this would be another one that if we only have one trustee, not the other one. Okay.
And there was an update from the staff who are involved in this group in the April board packet, and going through their collaboration on a newsletter and some other pieces. So as Lee said, we do have active staff participation.
Okay. Is anybody else interested in liaising with the collaboration for early childhood? If not, we will leave this with Christina sort of being our representative and letting the board, or letting the staff drive more of it for now.
Always, but I'm not capacity, but we just, that's important.
Okay. Then I believe these can stand as my appointments then for these specific committees. iGov will be Christina and Annie. COG will be myself and potentially another board member if somebody decides they have.
If we can get scheduling. Like I said, if I can make the meetings, I will do that.
Okay. Planet Green, for now, we will leave in the hands of Matt and the staff to provide us with a monthly update. Friends will be Mika and Colin. Out with Purpose will be Suzanne and Annie. And collaboration for early childhood will be Christina alongside the staff members who are already working with the collaboration. Everybody feel comfortable with that? Okay. Is there anything specific I need to do to my family gavel or?
I don't think so.
Okay.
We were just talking about doing we need to vote, I don't think you do. I think you're good.
I was gonna say, you guys get to vote on the things you all just volunteered to do. Okay, wonderful, that's actually far more complete than I thought we would get today, so that's wonderful. I will do a recap email later in the week and remind everybody what you volunteered for, and then try to put in also the dates or the frequency of the meetings as well. I think the last item is new business. And this is the non-resident library card and the associated annual fee.
Yeah, so this is an annual conversation the board has. It's a program that the library elected to participate in many years ago. And this defines what the non-resident card sort of does and how much is charged for it. So really what this is saying is that the board supports this calculation of participating in the program. As you saw from the memo, it's about just under $12.30 increase. This is an offering, but it does not sound like we have many people who utilize.
I don't think we've ever had anybody.
I think there maybe was one last next year.
Okay.
I was interested in this as a, as I returned to the state and I looked at the range of, what's charged,
The rates?
Yeah, the
Yeah,
rates
rates.
for it, from different libraries, and there is a significant range, and I did not make a spreadsheet, but I would say that we are comfortably in the middle, we're not. I wanted to make sure we were not sort of leading the pack in how much we were charging, which if we were, I mean, that's legitimate based on the formula, but there were several that were.
Do we have, and I understand, do we have corporate memberships, like if companies want to use like research or reference and join, like not as an individual?
I think there's so much reciprocity that exists.
There is, like if you own a business in Oak Park, you can get a card. We give teachers library cards. A lot of our resources can be used like within the building. You don't require a library card. So I feel like, yes, in terms of like services and access to information, we do get a lot of people who do not have Oak Park library cards. Either they have a library card from another library or they're just in the building using the resources.
I do not think we offer a corporate card, but we can do a little bit of that.
I mean, I don't know if it's worth pursuing, it just reminded me of the old days when Chicago Public used to have that, they'd have a corporate membership, and so you could call as a, like as a private law firm, I could call a reference librarian there, and they would fax me, that's how old fashioned it was, things from that, I'm just curious, I don't know that it may be too antiquated to even care, I'm just curious.
We would do that.
Yeah, you're just right, yeah.
Because you call for information, we're gonna get it.
Yeah, it was more about like, there was a dozen, it was like a designated, like, yeah. Doesn't matter, it's antiquated, I think it's an old fashioned idea.
I think it's worth learning the history of our library doing that. Some database contracts.
That the licensing wouldn't allow for, but if you had a card, could you use it?
I think some of them are to the point now where they actually speak to that kind of thing.
I
And
wonder,
if they
yeah.
do speak to it, my guess is that the answer is no.
That-
But I think it's worth knowing, and I appreciate the question, so we'll look into it.
Yeah, I mean, it might be just my own personal curiosity and not really, if anybody else cares. But yeah, that's licensing would be what I would think would be.
I'm curious.
Just, for our folks at home, can we explain who would be eligible for this, or more importantly, who would not be eligible for this? Meaning, this is not just anybody can walk in off the street and ask for a library card and hand us $473.66 and get an Oak Park Public Library card, correct?
There is a definition, yes. So a non-resident is an individual residing in Illinois whose principal residence is not within the public library service area. And then that non-resident can purchase a library card anywhere.
Okay. I remember there being something that they have to, if they're in unincorporated territory, they have to go to like the closest public library? Am I making that up? I could be making that up.
No, I don't think you're making it up.
I only have the statute, I don't have the regulations. This is administrative code, I don't have that.
Megan,
I know, I'm sorry.
We can get an answer for next week.
The only reason I ask is because we are starting to see a divergence between the access to libraries here in Illinois versus other states. And I would like us to know what our options or obligations are for folks coming from more restricted areas, for them asking for non-residential cards. I just want us to know what our answer is on that.
Okay, and right now it is limited to residing in Illinois.
Okay.
So I know that there are differences in what's available throughout the state, but as things change in other states, I think that's a really relevant question. So I can double check those.
Okay. I would not want anyone to be disappointed thinking they could come here and purchase access, and then we have to tell them they cannot, or vice versa. All right, so our action item here is to vote that we are comfortable with this $473.66, with the understanding that Ellsworth and Lee are going to look for some additional information on what the limitations are for these cards, but I don't think that has any bearing on us voting on the calculation itself and whether or not we feel comfortable. All right, so I will entertain a motion to approve the cost and calculation related to the non-resident library cards and annual fee.
Motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Abstentions? Fantastic, it is approved. Ellsworth, did we have anything for closed session today?
I do not.
All right. As we have exhausted our agenda and we have taken care of all of our unfinished and new business, this meeting is adjourned.
Where's your gavel?